Hello friends, I'm Top from Easy Approach, and in this video we are going to make news application using GetX package. Just few days back I created video on GetX that was the introduction video, and people were requesting me to make some practical application using GetX after watching that video. So I come up with this idea. So at the last of the video we would have application something like this. You can see on the screen. So it has two features basically. It first shows the news headline. So you can see the list of news headline on this screen. And then we have another feature on this screen or on the other screen, that is search news. So it will search news worldwide. You can give any query and it will show you the news related to your query. So if I search here China, so you can see it's giving result that contains something like this combination of words. So if I try something else like Pakistan, so you can see it's showing result against your query. So these are the two features that we are going to have in our application. You can see functionality wise it's not a pretty big application. However, we are going to use a lot of practical things in this application that we normally use in big projects like API calling, state management, and dependency injections, and all that stuff. So I want you to watch this video complete. You would definitely learn a lot from this video. So now we are going to start this application. You can see this is the brand new Flutter application, and you can see the default code everywhere. So first of all, I'm gonna add the dependencies that we are going to use in our application. So for the dependency, the first one is the div package. So it will basically, we would need it to make HTTP requests. So I personally prefer this one. So that is why we are using this. We can use the HTTP or retrofit or anything you want. So you can add it after the cappuccino icons and you can click on pubget. Now the other dependency that we are going to use is this JSON serializable. So this would help us parsing the response that we will get from the server. So we don't need to write boilerplate code. We can use this serializable and this will generate some code for us. And definitely we are going to use GetX package. So you can find the dependency, the installing line that you have to add in your pub spec. So after the JSON serializable, you can add this line, and at the last, we will use this build runner. This will help us generate some code for us, so that we can use it for generating models code. So we can add this in-depth dependency since we don't need it to be compiled with the application. We just need it while development. So at the last, you can just click on pubget. This would install all the packages or all the dependencies that we need in this application. And for getting the news from the server, we are going to use this service that is newsapi.org. So it is pretty simple. You just have to create an account and then you can get the key on clicking on your email. Here's your key. And you can also find your key everywhere in the example. You can see this is my key. So they actually provide 3 endpoints and we are interested in 2 of them. So the first one is top headlines. So you can see this is the endpoint for the top headlines to get the top headlines of the country you specify. So you have to at least specify country or time or something. So we are going to specify country so that we can get the top headlines of that country. And you have to send the API key with your request as well. So you can send it either in as a query parameter, or you can also send as the bearer token. So we will send it using bearer authentication. So we are going to use this endpoint for getting the headlines, and for search news feature, we are going to use this everything endpoint that will search the news against your query from everything, from every news, not just related to a specific country or specific domain. So let's just start the real development. And I will suggest you, if you haven't watched my first video on GetX, then please uh, make sure you watch it first, because I have covered everything related to GetX in that video in detail, and I'm not gonna discuss about them in this video. So that would have definitely help you understanding this video. So let's just start making this application. So first of all, I'm starting from making the architecture or the structure of this application. So as you know, we have two features inside this application. The first one is the top headlines or the news headlines, and the second one is the search news. So I'm gonna have a feature folder inside the lib, and inside it, as you know, we have two features, so I'm gonna create two subfolders. The first one is for news headline, and the second one is search news. And make sure you make it inside the feature folder, not inside the news headline. And for the each folder, we would have three things. The first one is definitely we would have view for each feature, that is the screen, and we would have the controller. So controller would actually hold the state logic against your particular feature. And at the last, we would have binding. So I have already covered binding in the last video that I made in GetX, but just to understand, just to make it easy for you, binding actually helps bind the dependency and the state with your view. So it makes code more managed and more readable. So if you want more detail about this binding, you definitely need to watch the first video. So let's do the same for this one as well. Binding and controller, and at the last, let's make view. And for the stuff that will be shared different between different features, we are gonna have another folder inside the lib that will be called core. And for the services, I'm gonna create another folder inside the lib that is service. So these are a few things that I need to have before starting the development. So this is very simple. So now I'm gonna start from the very main thing of this application, that is HTTP service, because we are definitely going to call the API for getting the news data from the server. And in order to do so, we need to have some HTTP service. And as you know, we are using Deo package for this purpose. So let's create a service. Let's create a service HTTP service file inside the package, and let's name it HTTP service. And I'm gonna create it an abstract class. Okay, so it will define a contract, and that will have the generalization, all the general code, and we will provide the implementation of this in the class that will implement this abstract class. So for the HTTP service, we need to have two methods for this application. The first one would be init, that will initialize this HTTP service, and the second one would be the get request, because we are going to make only get request in this application. So I'm just going to have the get request method. And as you can see, we have specified here the return type as future response, because you know the calls are asynchronous, so that's why we have used here future. and in the return, we will get this dio response. So that is why I specify here this. And the second thing we need to have in this get request, in order to make the get request, we need to have the URL on which we want to hit. So let's just specify here the URL. We made this abstract clause just for the sake of achieving the loose coupling. We don't want our other clauses to depend on a specific code that is vulnerable to change. So we want the classes to be dependent on the generalization, so that when we change things in the specification, that doesn't affect the classes that is actually using that code. And now let's define the implementation for this HTTP service. I made a typo here. It should be init. Okay, so for the implementation, I'm gonna create a new file inside the services, and I'm gonna name it HTTP service implementation. So this will be a normal class, HTTP service MPL, and it will implement the HTTP service. So now, as defined in the contract, it needs to have this HTTP service implementation needs to have these two functions in it. So we have to override these functions. First one is the get request, and the second one is init. So first of all, we'll define the init method that will actually initialize the HTTP service. So before initializing, I'm gonna have some constants here. So the first one would be the base URL, and the second one is the API key. So let's get this base URL and the API key from the service that we are using. So this is the base URL. And for the API key, you can get it on clicking your email. And there you can find the API key. And now as we have the base URL and the API key, now we can configure the Dio package in order to make the HTTP request. So first of all, I'm gonna have the Dio instance, and inside the init, I'm gonna initialize it. And inside this, we have to specify the base options we want to use. So inside the base options, we can specify the base URL. So the base URL is base URL. And then we have the header. So as we have the API key, and as I said earlier, that we will send the API key in the header. So I'm gonna send it in the header. So it will have the key authorization. And for the value, we have to write here bearer, and we have to specify here the API key. So this is what you require for the configuration of your Dio package in order to make the HTTP request. And then we have the second method, that is get request. So we have to provide the implementation of this as well. So for calling the API, for making the HTTP get request, we have dio.get, and here you can specify the URL where you want to hit. So as this is asynchronous, we have to use here await, and you are using await, so we have to add the async as well. And let's wrap this thing and try and catch, so that we can get the exception also. Let's make the instance of response outside. And for the exception, we'll get the do error if we get some exception. So what we can do, we can print the message, and we can also throw this exception so that we can get in the caller method. And after this, if there's no exception, we can return the response. And in case of exception, we are doing nothing. And at the last, we are going to add the interceptors for the div as well. The interceptors actually helps you monitor the requests you are making. So for making sure that you are sending the correct data, you are hitting the correct URL and all that stuff, you need to add the interceptors in your div configuration as well. So for this, I'm gonna create another method inside this, which is initialization or initialize interceptors. And for adding the interceptor, you need to use div, and inside it we have add interceptors or just interceptors, and then we can call add. And inside it we can provide the interceptor wrapper. And inside this we have three things uh, what you have to perform on if you get any error. So first of all, let's specify on error. So inside it you actually get the error instance well you get while making the HTTP request. So what we can do, we can print this error on log so that we can know what sort of error we are getting. Okay, so this is error. Okay, and for the request, what we want to do while we are making the request. So here we receive the request instance, and then we can just print. We can just print first uh, the request type. Okay, so it is method, and we can also print the request path. It's actually the endpoint path that we are hitting. And at the last, we have the on response. We get the response instance. So while getting the response, so this will happen for each request that you'll be making. So for the response, I'm gonna print first of all the status code so that we make sure that request has been made correctly and we get the response that we want to. And then we want to have the response status message, and at the last we can print the response data. And inside the init, after initializing the div, we can initialize the interceptors as well. So this is it from the configuration of the HTTP service, and we can now proceed to the next step. But before proceeding further, let's run the application at least once, because I haven't run this application since I created the project. So it's installing the application. So the application is installed now. Let's see the output. So it will be the default UI of the application, because we haven't changed in the UI part. We just make changes in the, we just configure the HTTP service, and now we'll proceed further. Now, as we have done with the HTTP service, now we can create the news repository that will be responsible to make the API calls for getting the news from the server. So let's inside the core, let's create repository. And inside the repository, let's make news repository. So again, I'm gonna make it an abstract class in order to achieve the loose coupling. Then we will implement this repository class in the implementation. So for defining the contract, we need to have two things. The first one, get news headline will be the first method. So the return type will be future. And the second feature that we need to have is get searched news. And inside it, we need to have the search query. So these are the two functions that this repository needs to implement. So we are going to implement this interface or abstract class as well, so that we can inspire the implementation of this generalization. So let's create news repo implementation. And let's make it an ordinary class. And you just need to implement news repo class in it. And as defined in the contract, we need to specify the implementation of these two methods inside this repository. And now before proceeding further, let's create the model class for the response that we will get from the server. So this is the whole response that we will get from the server. So you can see it has a status, it has total results, it has the article list. So basically there are three things. If I minimize this thing, so it has a status which is in a string, and then we have a total result that is integer, and then we have a list of articles. So this is the same response that we will get in both of the APIs, the top headlines and the everything. So we need to make the model class for this response, so that we can parse it accordingly, and we can convert this JSON into our Dart object. So for this, what I'm gonna do, first of all, I'm gonna create this sub model that is of article, and then we will make the model for this whole response. So for this, let's create another folder inside the core, and let's name it model. So make sure you make it outside the repository. And inside it, let's create a model file for the article. So let's name it article. And let's make a class article. And we need to add here JSON serializable. Here we have to specify nullable false. And we need to import here JSON annotation.dart. And now let's see what we have in the structure of the articles. So we first of all, we have the source. So we are not actually interested in this source. We are rather interested in rest of the parts. So the first one is the author, and then we have title, then we have description, URL to the detail, URL to image, publish it, and the content, which is in this case null, but it's actually a string. So let's create the variable for each of these fields. So first of all, we'll make JSON key. And we'll specify here the name of the key. Actually, this is the key value pair, so we have to specify the key against each value. And then as it is a string, so you can say it author. And make sure this key should be same as this, because this model will parse the response, and it will search for this key in this response, and it will fetch the value against this key, and it will store the value in this variable. So you can give it any name to this variable name, but you have to make sure that this key should be same as in the response. And similarly, let's make some duplicate fields. So the other one is for description. So for the description, we have this key. So you can paste it here. Then we have the title. So let's copy this. And for the title, we can paste it here. Let's rename this. And then we have the URL to image, which is again a string. So I can name it image URL. And then we have the URL, just URL, which is actually for the detail of the news. And then we have content, which is the complete description of the news. So we can use it in the detail page of the news, but we're not going to make the detail page. It's your homework to make it. So, but we'll still keep it in the response. So these are actually 6 things that we have right now, and see if we have missed any. So we have publish at as well. So let's uh include this as well. Not sure if I'm gonna use it, but still we are going to have everything that we are getting in the response, just we are leaving the source. So you can store it in a string. However, this is actually this should be parsed in the datetime format. So let's make get datetime get published at date. Okay, so I think we should keep the data type before get, and we can try parsing. We can just send publish at inside it. So this is it. We have all the fields in the model class of this article model. But now we have some boilerplate code that we have to add also in this in order to make this build runner to generate the file that will be used for parsing purpose. So let's get the boilerplate code from the JSON serializable, because I always forget that code. You can see these 2 lines. We need to copy these 2 lines, and we need to add here. Just make sure you change the name from this person to your name of the class, so which is article. And another thing that you need to do is we need to create a default instructor, which is actually a requirement for generating the code for it. And another thing, which is the last step, is we have to include a file, and the name of the file will be same as your current name of the model file, so which is article dot dart, but you just have to add dot g before dart. So this is what you have to do in order to uh, in order to make build runner generate the code for you that will be used for parsing purpose. So these are all the things. You can see it's showing error because this file is not currently present, so we have to generate it using some command. So flutter pub run build runner build. So this is the command that you have to use in terminal, and you can see it will generate the article dot file, g dot file, and it would have these two implementation of these two functions. So this error will be no more after this file will be generated. You can see now the file is generated, and you can see there's no more error in the code. So this is the model class for the article. Now we have to make the model class for the whole response. So let's create another file, and I will call it news response model, and I'll name it news response model. And I think we can skip this model thing. And similarly, we have to add the JSON serializable. We have to pass it nullable false so that we can avoid nullability. This model cannot be null while parsing. And we have to import the JSON serializable or JSON annotation. And then we have to specify the JSON key. And the first name will be, I think, a status. We can go back again to see what's in the response. So first of all, we have a status. We can minimize this thing. So we have a status, which is a string, and then we have total results, that is integer. So first of all, we have a status that is string, and then we have the total results. Let's copy this. And then we have third thing, which is articles, that is the list of articles. So as we have already made the model for this articles, which is article file, so let's import this file. So you can name it anything, so I'm giving it articles. Then we again need to add the boilerplate code, so let's copy this from this file and just rename this article to new response. And again, we need to add the default constructor, which is news response. You can leave it empty. And another thing that you need to do is you need to include the news response model dot g dot file. And let's again run the build runner so that it generates code for you. So you can see now there is no more error in this file. So we have the model class for the article, and we have the model class for the whole response. So this is the essential that we need to make. Then we need to make it before actually calling the API. So you can see the generated file as well. So this is actually generated by the build runner. So now we can go back to repository to implement these two methods. So now, before doing anything, let's go in news repo, because we have created the model, and this get news headline and this get search news will return the list of articles actually. So let's give it a type, and let's import this article file. So we have core, so we have core. Inside the core we have model, and inside it we have this article file. And for this, for the other method, you can just copy and paste the return type. And in the implementation, let's remove this and let's recreate these methods. Okay, so this is good. Now, before for the each of the functions, we need to communicate with the server, and for communicating with the server, we need to get the HTTP service involved in this repository. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna create the HTTP service instance, and I'm gonna get this service instance in the constructor of this repository. And how I will get this? I will use the dependency injection from the GetX package. So let's initialize it, get dot put, and here you can specify uh here you can specify the HTTP service implementation. So this is actually we are registering this class, this service in the get package, so that we can use it for future in the different classes and in this class itself. And you can see we have this is actually the code for initializing within the get package any class that you want to initialize. So you can see we have created the instance of service implementation object, and we are assigning it to HTTP service. So we can do it because you can see the HTTP service implementation actually implements this HTTP service. So we can have the object of this instance, and you can assign it to HTTP service. So this is very simple thing in OOP. So I hope you can get it. And after initializing it, you can you can initialize the HTTP service. So if you have any confusion in this code, so you can go back to my first video in which I have explained it, how we can use the dependency injection from the get package. So if you have understood this, then we can proceed it. Now let's write the code for this get news headline. So first of all, I am going to make a variable that is response, and because we'll make the API calling, so that will be async, so we have to use our async, and we have to get the HTTP service instance, and inside it we have get request, and here you can specify the URL on which you want to hit or make the get HTTP request. So let's get the URL for news headline. So you can see this is the URL for news headline, and I'm gonna use the US country, so we can copy this from this to this, and you can change the US to your country as well. So just paste it here, and we have to, because this get request is actually future, so we need to use await as well. And for catching the response, for catching the error, if we get any, we can wrap this thing and try and catch. So for this, what we have to do, we have to make this response instance out of the try, so that we can access it outside the try and catch. So I think this is cache related issue. So what we can do, we can escape. We can just make it inside the try and catch, so that it automatically gets the best type for it. And inside it, or we can first parse this response. So let's make final parsed response. So this will be a raw response, but in order to parse it, we need to use the function from the generated file, so which is get news response model actually. Okay, news response, and inside it we can pass the response dot data, and inside the exception we can print the exception. Also, we will return null. Okay, so we need to return here the list of articles as well. So you can return the list of articles which is inside the parse response. So similarly, you have to make almost the same code, just you have to change the API. You need to use here async, and let's get the best API for it. So we have slash v2, and we have to paste it. So you can paste it here, and we just need to change here the Bitcoin thing. We need to make it dynamic, and we need to replace it with query. So you can just use here the user specified query. So this is it. We have implemented these two methods that will be helpful in order to get the news headline and the search news. And now we will use this repository in the controllers of our UI, that is actually responsible for calling the methods from the repository, and to provide the data that will be provided by the repository to the UI, so that it can show on the screen. But before writing the code for controllers, let's first create the view, because now we have done with the with the repository part, with the services part. Now we are good to work with the controllers and UI. So let's first create the UI for news headline. So the UI would not be so fancy. You can, however, do some fancy stuff, but because we have limited time, so I'm gonna create it simple. News headline screen or view. So just create a stateless widget, and let's give it news headline view. We need to import the material.dart file so that we can get rid of error. We would have a scaffold as a base, and inside it we have an app bar. For the title, we can specify here the text widget. Inside it we can give news headline. And for the body, for now I'm just giving an empty container. Okay, so we can copy and paste the same code in the other file also. Or let's first create the drawer also, so that we can navigate between different screens. Let's create a list view, because we have two menu bar or menu options in the drawer. The first one will be So inside the list style, we have title. So let's name it news headline. We have on tab, in which we'll specify the method for navigation. And the third one is the leading widget, which will be the icon before the title. So we can give any icon. I'm using some random stuff. Okay, so I'm gonna go with this. So this is actually icon. And we can copy the same thing for the other page, which is search news. And for the icon, we can use a search icon. And as this drawer will be shared in both of the screens, so what I can do, I can make this global inside the core. So let's make another folder inside the core, and let's name it widget. It will be the widget that will be shared across different screens. Let's name it drawer. And we can have a function get app drawer. So that's it. And now we can specify here the get app drawer. Similarly, we can copy the whole code and we can create another view for search news view. You can give the same code, just we need to change the name and the title. And now we have a couple of screens, and we have two features also, so no need to create another screen. Okay, so now we'll get rid of the default code. Change the theme color as well. So we can get rid of this my homepage widget. And first of all, what we need to do, we need to change this material app to get material app, so that we can use the navigation from the GetX package, so that we can avoid the boilerplate code. And we can also get rid of this home property. First, we will define the roots. So for defining the roots, we have get pages, and inside it, for a single root, we have get page. Here you can specify the name of the root, because we have two roots. The first one is the news headline, so we can give it news headline. And for this name, we have the news headline view. Okay, so actually we have to return this widget, something like this. And for the other page, we have we can give any name. So we have search news, and for this name, against this name, we have this search news view. So in order to go to this screen, we can use this name, and for going this screen to this screen, we can use this name. So the initial root, because the initial screen of our application is news headline, so we can specify here news headline. Okay, so let's run the application. So you can see this is the news headline screen, and if we open this, so you can see there are two options. However, we haven't specified the navigation code here, so let's write the navigation code also. So let's open the widget drawer, and inside it we can write get dot to, and sorry, to name, because we are using name root, and here we have to specify the name of the root. So this tapping on this news headline should take us to the news headline screen, so we have to specify the same name that we have specified in the main. So you can see for news headline view, we have specified this name, so we can use this name. And for going on search news, we have this name, so we can copy this name. Okay, so if I rerun the application, so let's see if we can navigate. So if I click on search news, you can see we are back, we are on the search news. And if I click on news headline, so you can see we are on news headline. Now we have created the UI, actually some part of the UI, because we have to create some more part. But now we are good to create the controller file, which is the state file for this news headline or search news screen. So let's create the controller file. So I'm gonna create news headline controller, which will basically holds the state logic. And let's make news headline controller, and it will extend the GetX controller because we are using GetX as a state management. Okay, so before doing any code for this controller, I'm gonna also have the binding class for this screen. And as I said the binding actually binds the controllers and the services that we are using for in a specific screen. So it actually binds the services and the dependencies with the view, so that the code will be more manageable and more readable actually. So let's create the binding class, news headline binding. Oh, what happened? So let's create class news headline. I think I have to recreate it because I have did something wrong. The news headline binding. And it will extend the bindings, which is from GetX. And now we have to override a method, which is dependencies. So here we have to put all the dependencies in the GetX that we will use for this news headline feature. Because on this screen, on this news headline screen, we need to have the reference of this news headline controller and also the reference of repository, so that we can get the data from the repository and we can also manage the controller. So what we can do inside this binding class, we can put get.put, and first of all let's put the news repository, and then let's put the news headline controller. So this is actually to get the data from the repository, the news data, and this is the state. This is a reference of a state. So we need to have these two things bind together with the view. So that is why I have put all these things here. And now to actually reference this binding against this view, we need to register this in the get page. So we have a parameter which is binding. So here you can specify the reference of the binding that you just made. News binding. This is it. And similarly, we can create the controller for news. Search news actually. Search news controller. This will also be the state holding point for the search news screen, and it will also extend the GetX controller. Right now we don't have any code, but we are going to create the binding class for this as well. search news binding. This will also will be used for binding the dependencies and the services that this search news view will use. So this will also extend the bindings. And let's override the dependencies. And here we have to put the search news controller. And we don't need to put the repository class because we have already put it in the search news, sorry, in the news headline binding. And since the news headline will open first, and when it opens, it will register the repository, so we can get the reference of the repository in the next down the tree widgets, in the next down the trees screen. So as we will go search news binding after the news headline, so we can get the reference without putting it again. So we don't need to put it again. Now we can again reference this binding to the get page, search news binding. So this is it. We have bind the dependencies and the state files with the root, and now we can further proceed, and we can write the code for the controller and the UI. Now inside the news headline controller, what I want to do actually for this news headline screen, I want to load all the news headline when this screen opens. So by default, we don't have to do anything. When we will open the app, by default, it will load all the news headline on the screen. So what I have to do, I have to initialize, or I have to load all the news headlines from the news repository in the constructor of this news headline controller. So what I'm gonna do, first of all, for getting the data from the repository, we first need to have the reference of the repository. So what I'm gonna have inside the controller, I'm gonna make the news repo reference, and inside the news headline controller, I'm gonna have I'm going to initialize this news repo. So you can get the instance of this news repo implementation by using this code get.find. And how you are getting this news repo instance, because in the binding class you actually initialize this class within the get package, and you can, whenever you initialize something in the get, you can access it outside, or the next classes or the other classes you want to access. So this is the beauty of GetX. So we can because this is initialized after the news repo implementation, so definitely we can access the instance of this news repo implementation inside the news headline controller. So we are going to have the reference of this, and now we need to call the method that is inside get news headline, that is inside the news repo. So before calling this, we need to have the variable for storing the list of articles. So for the observable list, we have to use rx list. So it is observable, means you can observe the changes in the list, and then you can update the UI accordingly. So it's what get gives you. And inside it, you can specify the name of the class that you want to make list of. So for getting this, so inside the core we have model, and inside the model we have article. So now we have the list of articles. Actually, it's just a reference. Let's create the load news headline method, and it will be async, since we are going to call async functions. And what we can do, we are going to call the method that is inside the news repo. for getting the data, get news headline. So it will return the list of articles. You can see the return type of this is list of articles. So we have assigned it in result, and now we have to first check if the result we get is not null. If the result is not null, what we can do, we can assign the articles. We can actually assign this result into articles. So result is just the list of articles, and the articles that we have created here is the RX list, which is observable list. To convert the normal list into observable list, you just need to add OBS after the name. And in case we didn't get the expected result, we can just print the. Okay, so we can just print it no data received. Okay, so because I want to load all the news headline when this screen will be open by default, so we need to call this method in the constructor. And also I'm gonna show the loader on the screen as well once while we will be making the API request. So I'm gonna create another variable which is rxbool, the observable bool variable, and let's give it a name is loading. So right initially the screen will not show any loading, so we are setting it to false. However, we are creating two methods, that is show loading and we have hide loading. So for show loading, what we can do, we can toggle the is loading variable. Because it is observable, you cannot do something like this. You have to do it this, or the better way is you can just toggle. Similarly, for hiding, you can also toggle again. We can have the same function for this purpose, but just for the readability, we are creating two functions. And what we can do now, before calling the API, we can show the loading. And once the API calling has been done, we can hide the loader. So this is the code we need to have for the controller. And now we will do the UI part for this screen. Okay, so before making changes in the UI, what we can do, because we have associated the binding and the controller with the view, and we have put the code on the constructor for loading the headlines, we can run the application. It should load all the data, and it should show in the terminal, because we have added interceptors, and the reason we have added is we want to see the progress, and we want to monitor the requests, what we are sending, what we are receiving. So even though we haven't showed the result on the screen, but we should actually get the response on in this terminal. So let's open the application. So you can see it's calling the API, and we are getting some error. So this is the benefit. Okay, so we have issue int is not a subtype of a string. Oh, I have made this total results as a string, but it should be integer value. So let's make change. Yeah, it should be integer. And after changing, we need to run the build runner again. Okay, now this should run. So our first screen is open. You can see it's calling the API and it's getting the response. Okay, and we are getting the data. Wow, actually we have done the core thing. We have actually achieved what we want to do in this tutorial. However, we just need to show it on the UI. So it's more like a UI part we have left, but still we will complete this thing. Now, firstly, what I'm gonna do, because while the API gets called, is being called actually, so we need to show some sort of loader on the screen so that we can make the application interactive. And so for this purpose, we have also created the uh, is loading bool variable inside the controller so that we can observe this variable, because this is observable and can change anytime. So we can observe this variable on the UI, and based on the value, on the current value, we can update the UI. Like if the value of is loading currently is true, we can show the loader, and if it is false, we can show some other thing that we need to show. So for this, what I'm gonna do, for observing the observable variable and to render the UI and to return the UI accordingly, we have a widget that's provided by GetX, which is OBX, short of observable. So inside it, you can return. You can first check the is loading, if is loading is true or if it is false. So for checking is loading, we need to get the reference of news headline controller. So for getting the reference, what we can do, we can just use final controller, and you can just use get.find. And here you can specify news headline controller. Because as you know, we have initialized this controller in the binding class, so we can get the reference of it. And inside it, you can use return. And inside the controller, we have is loading, and we will check if it is true. So if it is true, we will show in the center circular progress indicator. And if it is not true, it means the data has been loaded. We can rather show list view. Okay, we can wrap inside the container with some margin. And we can have a list view dot separate it. Oh, sorry. So the item count, that is actually the count of the items of the list. So we can get the count from the controller dot articles dot length. So this will be the total count of the items. And separator builder actually separates the items, so you can just make a divider. That's it. And for the item builder, what I'm gonna do, because I need to show some data for each item, so I'm gonna create a column widget so that we can have multiple widgets in a column. And let's define cross-axis alignment to center so that everything starts from the right, from the left actually. And first of all, we can have the title of the news headline. So for getting the title, we can do articles. Sorry, we first have controllers. Inside it, we have articles. And for getting the current article, we have index. And inside it, we have title. And we can style it to make it a little prominent. Let's have let's specify the font size. Sorry, just text style. You can specify the size to 16, and we can make it bold. Okay, so we can also have the description, but let's not make it bold, or it should be small. And between this, we can have a little space, a vertical space you can have using size box. Let's specify some height 4. And before the title text, we can have the image as well. So for image, we can use image.network because it's coming from the network. So you can specify the link controller.articles.index and .image URL. And between this, we can also specify some space like 8 pixels. I think this is it. But it's still giving some error in this file. I'm not sure where's the error. Okay, let's run this application. You can see it's loading because it's currently calling the API. And whoa, you can see it's showing the result. However, it's showing the error as well because in some of the news, in some of the articles, we have image null. So for this, what we can do, if we have image null, if we have null image, we can rather show a container, an empty container. Okay, so if I run the application again, you can see it's calling the API, and I think in most of the, okay, we are getting the images in some of the articles. Wow. So you can see this is a simple application, but as we have implemented it from the scratch, and it must be important for you because as I remember myself when I started Flutter, uh, I started from very small things, and for me at that time, that would be something that can make me learn new things. So now let's proceed to the next screen, which is the search screen. Now for the search screen, we somehow have the almost 80% we have the same functionality. However, we just need to have a text field in that screen. So first of all, I'm gonna make a text field. So let's minimize this news headline and let's focus on this news, search news. So first of all, I'm gonna create a column widget so that I can have multiple widgets. Let's make it start. And first of all, let's create a text field. And just for making it a little better, we are going to have some decoration. Not much. I'm just gonna have a prefix icon, which will be a search icon. Okay. And the second thing that we are going to have is here we need to have a dynamic widget. So it will be either a loader or it will be either a list of news. So let's make it obx observable. So before proceeding further, I think we should create some code for the search news controller. And since the functionality is 80 to 85% same, so what we can do, we can copy the code just to save the time. However, I would not prefer you to copy the code because the video length, I think, it's almost crossing 40, maybe, I'm not sure. So we can copy the same code here. So we need to make some changes. First of all, we need to get the reference of news repo. So we need to import this. And for the constructor, we can have this news search news controller. And by default, we won't load the uh, news. However, we will load the news once a user will type at least 3 characters on the in the search bar or in the text view. So let's import this file as well, because we need to get the references of news repo implementation. We need to have the loading thing because we are going to use the loading stuff, and we need to have the list of articles. Let's import the article. And let's initialize it also, because I think it's better to initialize in this case, so that we can't get any error due to null thing. And let's rename this to search news headline. And the another thing that we need to do is we need to initialize a text editing controller. Search text controller, so that we can get the text from the text field that will be provided by user. So we can initialize it text editing controller, and we can associate this text editing controller. Okay, so it's giving some error. It's not defined for search news controller. Okay, it's now okay. So we can associate this controller to the view here. And let's have the reference of this controller, the controller of GetX. Get dot find search news controller, because we have specified, or we have initialized this controller in the binding of the search news view of root. So we can find it, we can get the reference using this. And for associating the controller of text field, we can first get the reference of controller of search news. So these are the same names, so this may be a little confusing. However, we are talking about search news controller for this text field, and we are talking about the state controller for this whole screen. Okay, so we have associated the search text controller as well. Now what we have to do, on at least 3 characters, or we can say multiple of 3 characters, we need to hit the API, the search news headline, so that every 3 plus when user type 3 characters, it will hit the API. Then if he types 6, then again hit the API. So something like this. So what I'm gonna do in the constructor, I'm gonna add a listener in search text controller, and I'm gonna see the length of the text that is provided by the user. So if it is the multiple of 3, and if it is not equals to 3, because 0 is also multiple of 3, not equals to 0, then we need to call the search news headline. Search news headline, sorry. And inside the search news headline, we need to change it because it is using get news headline. So we need to have search news, get search news. And inside it, we have to specify the query. And for this query, we can just use search text controller.text. Okay, so we have done the controller part. Now we have to make changes accordingly on the UI. Now what I have to do, first of all, I have to observe is loading stuff. So inside the is loading, if it is true, it means it is currently loading data. Then we will show circular progress indicator. Let's make it in the center. Else, we need to first check if the controller.articles is not empty. So if it is empty, it means we don't have anything, we don't have any result of search. So what we can do, we can show center text, format it, no news found, something like that. And if it is not empty, it means we are getting some response. So what we can do, we can show the list. So we can copy this whole thing, and we can put it here. And since we use the same names and code and all that stuff in the other controller as well, we don't need to change anything. So I think this is it. Let's run the application. So is the default screen, news headline screen, that will call the API by default inside the constructor. We don't have to do anything. So this is working nice as before. Now the main thing to test is search news. So if I go on search news, it say no news found because we haven't searched anything. So if I say, let's say Pakistan, so when I type 3 characters, it should call the API. Let's see the logs. So it's calling the API, and you can see it's showing some result as well. So you can see it includes PAK. So we can change something obvious like Bitcoin. So you can see it's showing the data, it's showing the news according to against your giving query. However, I cannot see much Bitcoin stuff, but it's working. Let's say it India. You can see it's not India, but something Indiana. So it's not showing the exact result. However, it's showing the result close to this your given query. So I think this is it. In this video, we have done almost everything that is important while making a complete application. We have done the API calling. We have worked on the UI as well. We have worked on the state management. We have also included the GetX package that you requested a lot. So that's a complete bunch of knowledge you can get. So this is it from this video. In the next video, we'll learn some new topic. And as you can see, I did a lot for you guys, and I observed that most of my viewers, almost 80% of them, are not my subscribers. So that is really bad. So I want you to please subscribe my channel if you haven't subscribed it, and please share the videos with those who want to learn Flutter with easy approach. And thank you for watching.